Hi, welcome to the Sankofa Pan-African series. Our guest today, Dr. Courtland Wyatt, is one of our viewers. Dr. Courtland Wyatt, like you, is a member of our Sankofa Pan-African series channel community. He reached out to me after embarking on a search of his family ancestry through a DNA analysis, which turned out that he's from a rather interesting ethnic group. He'll be sharing some of the results of that DNA analysis with us today. But before we meet Dr. Wyatt, please click on your subscription and notification buttons. Thank you. Welcome, Dr. Courtland Wyatt. It's really great to have you on Sankofa Pan-African series, and thank you also for supporting us by watching and sharing our videos, and for reaching out, with this interesting discussion we're going to be having about your ancestry. Thank you. Welcome.
Well, thank you.
Yeah. So I know you have questions that you'd like to ask me, but let's start with you telling us a bit about yourself.
I grew up in St. Louis, Missouri. As you know, I grew up there, born and raised in St. Louis, and St. Louis is a very interesting city. There's a lot of different things that happen, not necessarily in St. Louis, but all throughout America. Where as a kid, I just saw stark differences in the way that certain people lived, So like the high school that I went to, it was a good high school, but it wasn't necessarily the best high school. But I would see differences as like if we play, when you play sports and you travel to different high schools, you would see that their facilities, especially white schools that were in different areas, their high schools were a lot more nicer than our schools, and that always struck me. You know what I'm saying? And then also seeing just how how groups of Black people, we grew up. When you travel outside of our neighborhood, you go to other neighborhoods. How come their neighborhoods are so much nicer?
Were schools still segregated when you were in school? What?
Oh, no. They were only segregated because that was just the area that you lived in.
Okay.
95% of our school was Black. It just happened to be that's where we lived, but it wasn't segregated.
Well, did you also go to university there?
No. I went into the military in the United States Army for a few years, and then from there I left the military and decided to go to school. I went to Howard University, and I studied physical therapy, and I have and that's where I got my doctorate in, is a doctorate in physical therapy from Alabama State University. So,
why did you decide, to trace your ancestry? What motivated you?
In this world, even as a kid, you could pick up on things when you just feel that certain things are just not right. You know what I'm saying? Like you hear something, you see something, it's like, why is it like this? I was always seeing like, why are people in this condition? And then, I remember as a kid when the movie Roots came out, the Alex Haley movie, the book, and then they made it into a movie. So you're watching that, and then, also, you get little bits and pieces while you're in school about slavery, but they don't go too much in depth into it. And how you got here, it just didn't make sense to me. Like, okay, I'm in America, but they call me, I'm supposed to be called an Afro-American. I speak what they call English. Why am I speaking English? And then how did, I watched this movie, like is that how we supposed to got from Africa to here, and now we're supposed to stay here? Or, all these different things played a role in my mind as to like, okay, there's more to it than what we're being told.
When you embarked on this journey, did you start at all by talking to other family members, maybe parents, grandparents, before deciding to actually go trace your DNA?
No, I didn't. I just kind of internalized it and saw for myself.
Please share the results of your DNA set with us.
Yeah. So that's another thing. Like, I was at a conference and they had the Black Business Conference of America. I'm not saying the name right now. It kind of escapes me, but so they had a whole lot of speakers, and they had this one lady. She started a company called Ancestry, African Ancestry, and a lot of people got this, and they shared their story about how they wanted to trace the ancestry back to Africa. So I signed up and I took the test, and they told you that you have to go through your mother's side. You have to do a matriarchal DNA process versus the father, because sometimes when they dealt with the slave trade or things of that nature, that sometimes a lot of times the slave owners were white and they will rape the women. So if you trace your ancestry back, you don't want to be mad and it comes from Russia or a European country somewhere, So I did the matriarchal, and what they gave me was they said I was from the Kanuri people of Nigeria.
Kanuri people of Nigeria.
See, I can't even pronounce it right.
Incidentally, we're actually doing an episode on Kanem Bornu, and it's actually been recorded, and we're going to be releasing it soon, because it's tied to your history in some way. Because the Kanuri people, they can be found in the northern parts of West Africa, predominantly now in Nigeria. Now, the Kanuri ethnic group emerged out of two kingdoms that came together. One kingdom was called Kanem, the other was called Bornu. The two now came together and became Kanem Bornu. Okay, and the lingua franca of the Kanem Bornu Empire, which emerged after the two kingdoms joined together, was Kanuri. Kanuri became the lingua franca. Now the empire evolved into a major diplomatic power in the Sahara. Like I said, they are spread across the northern parts of Western Africa, and because of their location, which was at a crossroads between Northern Africa and Sub-Saharan Africa, the empire benefited from a lot of contacts with different parts of Africa. The Kanem Bornu Empire was one of the major Islamic empires that evolved after the decline of Africa's golden age. And so at the height of its glory, it spread to places like Chad, the areas the southern parts of the areas that we now know as Libya, and eastwards towards the Republic of Niger, and then of course northeastern Nigeria is predominant, So those, and then also northern Cameroon. Those are the areas that the empire covered. The empire was also renowned for its military might. It was reputed to have as many as 10,000 strong cavalry, and they had very highly skilled horsemen. Sadly, it was also one of those empires whose rulers were very involved in the slave trade, especially both with the trans-Saharan slave trades, that is selling of people to the Middle East, to the Arab countries, and then also when the Europeans came, they also sold some of their people southwards, who now went through the slave coast that we talked about. So that's but look out for our episode on Kanem Bonu, where you have more of the fuller history of the Kanuris who were made as a result of that empire.
Okay, yeah, that was very insightful. I'm looking forward to seeing that episode. Why do you think it's important to know the diaspora and the history of people of color or melanated people?
History is not just about telling. It's not just our history. All history is important. Ours especially. Because it has been maligned. It has been so much of it has been kept. A secret. Most of it has been ignored. But I think it is important for people to know their history, not just because they want to be regaled with stories of a glorious past, or even when the past has not been glorious. So history does not only tell stories about the past, it tells us how we got to be to the present, how we came to be who we are today, and in telling us who we are today, I believe history has a very important role to play, because if we know what we were in the past, if we know how we got to where we are today, we are strengthening our position, is stronger, we are wiser about how we need to get to the future. History equips us so that those of us who are smart, about it, do not make the same mistakes that were made in the past, so that our present is better consolidated, and then we can be more strategic about planning our future. So our history is as important a part of our education as knowing, as the ability to read or write or do numeracy and all of that. Our history is just as important if we're to make any sense of our present, and then make sure that our future is going to be better than the past.
Right. Because I think that a lot of things that get missed in translation is like who people were before slavery. I mean,
yes,
if you got to know, that you come from a lineage of kings, scientists, doctors, all these different things, and that
the fact that now you come from a lineage of cavalry men, people who were very strong in military, you might just say, oh, so I found myself in the military. It was there in your makeup. It's been guiding you without you even knowing. Because I found it interesting when you say you ended up in the military. As a Kanuri, you shouldn't be surprised you did. It might have been better if you knew that before you went into the military. It might have equipped you better, for performing better. But it's with so much history, is so much part of who we are. That the more of it we know, the stronger we are, the better we are.
Right. And like I said, just learning stuff like, how the Greeks came and invaded and took all the books and the libraries, and they took it for their own. And, and if you don't know these type of things, or I may be making an oversimplification of it, but once you know these things, like, wait a minute, like, why was it whitewashed? Like,
well, the whitewashing came a lot later than the Greek invasion of ancient Egypt. The Greek invasion of ancient Egypt was during the time of Alexander the Macedonian. Not in history as Alexander the Great. It wasn't great to us,
right?
And then the Romans, when they took over, when they conquered the Greek Empire, they were the ones who actually burnt the library at Alexandria and all of that. But the whitewashing came much later. And I've also done this in a past episode where I try to answer the question of why and when, African history became twisted. And what research shows us is that it was a real deliberate effort, because in order to justify colonization, slave trade, and all the other dastardly things that Europe needed to do in order to survive a period in their history where they had to, look for resources from elsewhere, or their countries would have perished. They were besieged by famine, crop failure, plagues. They were just poor. And in terms of resources, they had nothing, and so they started sending mercenaries who we've been taught in history, to look up to as explorers. But these mercenaries, Columbus, and his cohorts, were all they were equipped by their monarchs to go and look for resources. And where did they go and look for those resources? In other continents like Africa, Asia, and even the Americas, that for resources which they now sold and took back to develop Europe. Now, in order for them to now justify this feeling, and of course, wherever they went, they also they were seeing human beings, and they transported them in the most dangerous ways in order to go and serve on plantations and things like that. They had to justify these acts that animals would not even do to one another, that they were doing to other human beings. And the way to do that was to rewrite history, okay, and then also classify human beings in such a way that the whites were seen as superior in everything and in every way, okay? And that's when the false history that most of us are taught in school evolved. Even the racialization, the racial demarcation of the racial hierarchy of human beings, all came as to work towards the justification of what, the countries that now constitute Europe and America, Canada, the developed world, what they were doing to other people. They had to justify it. And so they had to ignore, they first of all had to deny that any other race, any other group of people had anything to do with civilization.
Right.
Yeah. And they did that by now denying what other people contributed and pushing forward other people's ideas as their own.
Right.
But like our good historian, Henry Clark, a lot of our historians have challenged this. Henry Clark, John G. Clark, K. Cantor Diop, they insisted we must ask, what was the rest of the world doing when Europe was supposed to have been developing, civilizing the world? If you start from that question, then the answer becomes clear.
Right.
That the continent which had the first human beings for thousands of years before human beings even showed up anywhere in the world, had to have laid some foundations, for the civilization of this world. And then we have all of that through archaeology, through the studies of ancient empires and African empires and all of that.
There's a lot to be said. I mean, that we don't get taught in school. Like, you learn about the Dark Ages, or what we didn't learn about it, but the Dark Ages and then the Renaissance period, and the Inquisition and all these different things. That if you knew these things, you'll be a lot wiser. I think even myself as a kid, or even today's kids, if they knew some of these things, like, okay, uh, how did Columbus discover America? No, I don't think so. How did blacks already be in America, and then he takes some with him, and this is kind of going through the dark ages, you know,
Mm.
and then and how the Moors were kind of were in charge of uh, of things
The
during that time,
Iberian Peninsula.
right? And they were, most people don't know that they were black. And why do they call it the Dark Ages? Because they were in darkness, and we kind of, I mean, people of color were the kings of Spain and stuff during that time.
I guess one of the questions that most people wonder about is whether people of whether there were people in America before the discovery and all of that. Uh, by the fake discovery by Columbus? And the answer to that is, of course, yes. The First Nations, the first Native Americans were on the American continent long before anybody else. And most Eurocentric scholars want to put forward the idea that they got there from Asia, from Europe, some parts of Europe and Asia and all of that. But the Native Americans themselves do not buy this theory, because they have in their oral traditions, in their cultures, they tell you that they've always been there, that they've always been on the continent. So, so there's that, that's still, the jury is still out on that. But one thing we do know is that the Native Americans were there before anybody else. So whether they want to now say that they came originally from Europe or Asia or anywhere else, the Native Americans themselves are saying, no, we didn't come from anywhere. We've always been here.
Right.
With regards to Black people, now that is even more contentious, because, of course, Eurocentric scholars don't want to believe that Blacks only came to the Americas with a slave trade, with slavery, and after Columbus discovered so-called discovery. But there's so much evidence, to disprove this idea, even from Columbus himself. He took back with him some spearheads, which he said the natives, Americans gave him. He took them back to Europe, and those spearheads were the same type of spearheads used by warriors in West Africa. The combination of metals, gold and other metals used to make those spearheads are in exact proportion to the same used in West Africa. So how did those spears, and he said in his own diary that those spears was given to him, to the Americans. The Native Americans told him that they got those spears from black-skinned men who came in ships, to the continent.
Right.
But still, Eurocentric researchers are still challenging this, because they keep saying, how could Africans have got to the Americas by ship and all of that? But we have the evidence of explorers that were sent by Abubakar II, Mansa Musa's ancestor, as ruler, predecessor as ruler of Mali. He sent hundreds of men in ships to go and look for the end of the Atlantic. A lot of them never came back.
Yeah.
He sent them with enough food, water, and gold to last several years. Very few of them came back. He himself eventually set off on such a voyage to go and discover the end of the Atlantic, and he never came back. So, and there have been people in recent times who have used the type of ships that Abubakar and his men would have used to navigate the Atlantic and they discovered that the currents, the tidal, the waves, the air currents and things like that would have been favorable enough to get them to America. So we have that. And then, of course, there have been archaeological findings, carbon datings of archaeological remains, found on the American continent that could not have got there if Africans did not get there. There has even been discovered narcotics in mummies of ancient Egypt. The narcotics are the type that can only be derived from plants that only grow in the Americas. So if there was no contact between Africa and the Americas, how did those narcotics get there? And there are also pre-Columbia, all kinds of plants that could only have come from Africa to reach the Americas, like the gourd plants, the gourds that are used to make calabashes and things like that. They're only native to Africa. How did they get to the Americas? Even things like yam, sweet potato, cotton, all of these were there before slavery and Colombia. And then, of course, there are the massive Olmec heads. These are big, 11-foot high statues, heads of men that bear clear resemblance to Africans, with their thick lips, kinky hair, some even wear the kind of helmets that were worn by African warriors. Right. Even the Smithsonian has a pot. Europeans try to claim that we did not have ships until recent times. But there is a pot, and I use it in my live show that I did last week. It's a Nubian pot with images of ships on it. So how could Nubians have been drawing ships on their potteries or on their walls and things like that if they had never seen one? Right. So the evidence is overwhelming that there were black people, that the black people's first encounter in America were not as slaves, but as masters. Because people actually ask, if you do not respect or even revere someone, would you go to the extent of moving such large stones to build statues of them? And then there were also smaller statues that have carvings of people with pinky hair, African earrings and so on and so on. So the evidence is overwhelming.
We've been scattered abroad to the four corners of the earth.
Yeah.
How can we detour schools to teach truthful history?
Okay. Yes. Yeah. Well, I guess it depends on what country you're operating from. I think the way to go about that is, first of all, look for who is in charge of, the curriculum used in your country or your state and things like that, and find ways to form yourselves into some kind of pressure group to insist, that African history is world history. It must be a part of whatever curriculum children are being taught, not just something reserved for 1 month of the year to be studied during the African History Month, So you could start with your school board, if they're the ones in charge of curriculum development and things like that. And then insist that, yes, the curriculum needs to be expanded, to include African history with its world history. And also encourage more the kind of things that we're doing with Sankofa Pan-African series, because what we're doing here is to make history accessible so that you don't have to go to university to study history before you know your history. Because we've also started developing historical stories into illustrated children's books. So buy for your kids, your grandkids, get your school board to adopt our, Legends of Africa series, as part of of the school text, and then encourage other people who are doing the same. That way, if there are more of us getting involved in insisting that African history must be part of proper education. The sooner we'll start getting Africans and Africans in the diaspora will start getting the respect we deserve.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. It may take a little bit of doing, because like you say, the history, they don't want the history to come out, so they're still trying to downplay it and.
They don't want to teach our children at the school. Tell them at home. Let's teach them at home.
They gotta learn at home. Do you think it's important for people to trace their ancestries through like 23andMe and AfricanAncestry.com?
Oh, absolutely. For the same reasons why it's important to know your history, it's important to know who your ancestors were. And then also there are things about you that some of these organizations that trace your ancestry through DNA can reveal that might be useful for you. For instance, maybe diseases, the health history of your ancestry that can now help you to make more informed choice, towards living a better, kind of lifestyle in order to avoid those diseases. Oh yes, as many of it's important for people. It is a good journey to go on, to try and find out about your ancestry, not just so that you know where you're from, but also so that you know what kind of diseases and things like that you or your children might be susceptible to.
What is the future of Africa? We know it's one of the richest countries in terms of land, oil, minerals, and I see a lot of other countries trying to sink their teeth into Africa and steal the resources as they've been doing. So what is the future of Africa that you see in the modernization of Africa?
Well, it's a future which does not look bright right now, because those people, they are not just trying to sink their teeth into it. Their teeth are already sunk into it. The challenge is to get those teeth out. Knock them out every which way we can, because it's not just Europe or America, but there's the French as well, and I'm sorry, there's the Chinese as well, that have all sunk their teeth in various ways, into Africa. And so the future of Africa does not look very bright right now, but the more of us, who keep challenging the way things are in Africa right now, and the more of us who come to this consciousness that until Africa is able to determine the course of its own, its own future economically or whatever, it will continue to be at the mercy of these people, who it's amazing the extent and the length to which they would go, to keep Africa down because of our resources. It is the richest continent in terms of natural resources. I keep telling people that countries like the DRC have never known peace for no other reason, than the wealth that is available in that part of the world. It's the same with any other part of Africa that have any resources. If you look behind their trouble, you will find their former colonial rulers are still behind it. Yes, there's a lot of corruption in Africa. We have a lot of irresponsible leaders. Only a very small fraction of our leaders in Africa are responsible enough or educated enough or smart enough, to know that, some of these things, decisions they are taking, they just continuing to sell off, and impoverish the continent. A lot of them are too concerned, with pilfering from their national cake to actually see, that, what they're doing, that in a few more generations, their descendants will have to pay for it, so there is corruption in Africa. But I do know that corruption continues to grow stronger. Corruption because of the level of poverty of the generality of people in Africa. If more Africans were educated, had access to education, and the actualization of their natural abilities. You take a child who is born in Africa today, as gifted as a child born in anywhere else in the world, but that child's future is so limited by poverty. You understand? So, and the poverty of Africa is tied to its continued exploitation, by so-called developed countries, by Europe and the Americas through their World Trade Organization, the IMF, and all of that, and what they call globalization of economies, which do not pay African countries. So the corruption of African leaders is only half the problem of Africa. The other half of our problem comes from the skewed economic architecture of this world. So the future of Africa depends on Africans, fighting collectively wherever you are in your own small way, to fight it. Racism is a pandemic, is a global problem, which is why if the Black Lives Matter movement has taught us anything, it is the fact that racism has no borders.
That's just been played out in modern times,
Yeah.
That were going on slave ships and plantations. Yeah. It's the same thing. So it's still prevalent, and it's the same people doing it against the same group of people.
Yes, our leaders have always been in cahoots with those who exploit us. The same thing is still going on. Only very few African leaders are actually, showing that they have that commitment to their countries, and they are able to call out these, European. I think recently this decision taken by the president of Ghana, that they will no longer sell their cocoa and things like that. Those are, leaders that are thinking that we want more of those kind of leaders. What I'm actually finding with our histories, is that a lot of our ancestors were involved in the impoverishment, in the selling into slavery of our people, and today leaders might not be actually physically selling for cash, but they are selling us, in allowing our resources to continue to be exploited, and with the profits from our resources continuing to be used, outside of the continent.
Right.
What they are doing is just as bad as, those ancestors who sold their brothers, into slavery. So thank you very much for being a part of the Sankofa Pan-African series, and for sharing the incredible story of your search for your ancestry. Please continue to support us as you've always done by sharing our episodes, and we are welcome. I mean, we hope to have more conversations with you about other interesting topics in future. I hope you've enjoyed this episode with Dr. Courtland Wyatt as much as I have. Please feel free to give us a thumbs up and to share this episode with your contacts. But I'd like to leave you with a question that I'd really love you to address on our community page. Would you like to trace your ancestry? What do you think you'll find if you try to trace your ancestry? Please share with us on our community page. See you next time.